Daniel, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
So you are based in Beijing, is that right?
No, actually, I'm in Shenzhen, just across the
Oh,
border from Hong Kong. And I've been living here for about 12 years, part of the time in Hong Kong, but most of the time here in Shenzhen.
and are you an American?
I'm Canadian.
Oh, you're Canadian.
Yep.
So what made you, first of all, and I'm really interested in talking to you about so much that has gone on over there in China. I mean, what we're seeing, obviously, I live in Los Angeles. We're in a quasi lockdown. I don't know if what we're experiencing here was as intense as what you experienced there in China. I would imagine what we're going through is less intense, but we're going to find out from you. That's kind of the point of this conversation. But, really, first of all, how did you end up in China? Like, what are you doing over there?
Well, I love China. I'll get that right out of the way. I mean, I came here, I originally was doing a trading business, and I could have continued running it from Canada, but I came over to Hong Kong and Shenzhen, and I just really liked it here. I like the speed of life also. Yeah, in the first 10 years I was here, they built like 200 kilometers. There's my Canadian coming out. 200 kilometers. You can do the conversion.
Yeah. What is that in miles?
What is 120? I don't know, but 200 kilometers of subway line in 10 years. And in Toronto, we were waiting for this little shepherd line that took just years and years. And we had this train that we were talking about from downtown Toronto to the airport, which we had to discuss for 30 years before we actually broke ground. And I was just like, things are happening here, and the people are great. So I made an excuse to base myself here, even though I could have run that business from Canada. Then I got into running a brew pub. So I'm sitting in my brew pub right now, where we make craft beer, which was more of a fun kind of a side project.
That is, I think, that's amazing that you have a brew pub there. When we think of China, we think communism. And we think that, like, no freedom. How can you own a business? Yeah. Are you a Chinese citizen now? I mean, so how long have you been there?
So I've been here for 12 years.
Okay.
Technically, I could apply for a green card now. I just haven't, there hasn't really been any need to. I mean, I can do everything that I need to do here. You would think that having a local card, you could get access to more places or something. But I mean, even on my passport, I did again, Canadian 4,000 kilometer road trip through Tibet, and did some hiking through Tibet, and all these places people think you can't go.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't really felt the need to apply for it. And
so you're on a visa?
Yeah, it's a kind of a employment / business visa. Even when you own the company, it's still called an employment visa that you're under. And so I'll renew that, and my last one lasts for about 3 years, and it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to renew, so it's been no big deal. I'm a Hong Kong resident also, because I was living over on that side for a couple of years, running my business from there. And that's actually what really got me into kind of social media and vlogging. It was kind of the Hong Kong protests, and I had a very kind of an unpopular opinion about it from the West's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to talk about that. And so that's where I got started in terms of online content.
Doing your YouTube channel.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. So you've been there for 12 years. You have a brew pub. Chinese, are they drinking beer?
Oh, they are, yeah. And, the craft beer, I mean, I'm sure, especially where you are, you must know about the craft beer revolution. It's really taken off around the world. And all the other countries, China included, there was a little bit of a delay. So it's just kind of starting here, where people are learning what craft beer is, and they're realizing that there's so many different flavors, so many different possibilities, because everybody here just knew kind of German beer before that. And so yeah, people are drinking. Obviously, special circumstances right now. Not too many people are going out right now. We were closed for a while also, and there were certain rules which we can get into a bit later for restaurants and bars and places where people are gathering. So it's slow right now, but under normal. Under normal circumstances, quite a few people do come out. Yeah.
So before we go into, what kind of the lockdown measures were on you guys, what is the Chinese government doing for businesses? Because we just unveiled, here in the U.S., the Senate just passed the relief package, the virus relief package, that is pretty dismal for a lot of people. It's $1,200 to get you by for the next however long this lockdown is going to last. And I mean, for businesses, it seems really difficult. They have to jump through a lot of hoops. And so, I mean, are you getting any relief from the Chinese government?
So there are certain pressures they're putting on landlords. So the landlord told us that our February rent is free for this place.
Wow.
And then for the rest of the year, a 5% discount on all of the remaining months of this year. Then we can apply for certain benefits for lower rates on, I believe it's taxes, utilities, a bunch of other things. And they have put programs together to encourage us not to let any of our workers go during this slow period, with different assistance packages in that regard. It's all pretty new right now, but I have my staff kind of sending the applications in, and it's looking pretty straightforward.
Are you stressed out? I mean, are you thinking, I don't know how I'm going to afford this, or does it look like you're actually going to get the necessary need, or your needs met?
I think even with the packages, businesses will suffer. This is going to be a pretty difficult time to get through, and we're okay here. We're pretty light on the staffing, and we're relatively small shop. I mean, our brew equipment on the other side here takes up most of the shop space. So, I mean, we will pull through, but we are seeing other restaurants closing. There are some other places that are, yeah.
And they're just not going to I mean, they're not making it.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, the restaurant business is a difficult business anywhere, and sometimes people are working with pretty tight margins, and they're definitely not preparing or planning for any sort of an emergency situation like this. I mean, it's an opportunity also. The ones that do pull through, this is a way to shake out a lot of some of the smaller ones, or the ones that were suffering to begin with. And when the traffic really starts to come back, the ones who did manage to pull through will definitely benefit. So I'm not personally worried, but it is concerning to see what's going on around us. I mean, we will get more business because other people are closing, but I would have rather had our business succeed on better terms than on relying on other people not being able to continue, which isn't a very nice thing to happen.
So we're in March right now, the end of March. When did you guys start going did you guys do a full lockdown in your area? Because I know that Wuhan went into full on lockdown, didn't they? I mean, what was their circumstance versus yours?
Yeah, so I've got a bunch of friends in Wuhan, and it was a lot more mandatory there. And so what would happen here is everybody was recommended to stay home, but we were still allowed to go out. We were still allowed to go out to the grocery stores. There were a lot of controls in place. Every time you re-entered your building complex, you had to have your temperature measured.
Wow.
We had to.
Who did that? Is there somebody
the security
there?
guards? Basically, the security guards at all the entrances. Most buildings here, every building has its own security. There are some village areas in Shenzhen, which they don't really have a main gate. They don't have security. So what they would do for those villages is they would block off most of the entrances, and then you'd have one main entrance that people would get into the village from. And there you'd have government officials there checking their temperatures and doing all the things that they needed to do.
And what happened if you were unlucky and your temperature was a little high?
So then you've got to go to a fever clinic. You got to go to a fever clinic, and they'll check you out. They'll do the COVID-19 test on you, the swab, and everything like that. Potentially go into a quarantine area for a certain period of time if it does look like you're high risk. There was a lot of obviously a lot of conspiracy theories out there, a lot of people seeing the stuff I'll to back up to that example I told you about the villages being blocked off and having one entrance. What I was seeing showing up on Western social media was showing the blocked entrances and saying, see, nobody's allowed in or out. They're locking people up. And just around the corner from where they were taking that video, that was where the entrance was. And in terms of those people, those suspected cases, if you had a fever, they would go into, sometimes they would go into quarantine, and they might have to wait the 14 days or whatever it is. And the thing is I did an interview with a doctor not too long ago from Wuhan on my channel. And
yeah, I watched it. It was great. I think everybody should watch that video, and I'll put the link down below to watch that interview, which will also, send people over to your channel as well. But that interview was great. I mean, just listening to the inner workings of how those temporary hospitals that were put up, how they worked with the red zones, the green zones, the way how they had food from the various regions that was prepared for them specific to their likes and dislikes. I mean, it was
They were really taken care of. Some of them are starting to go back home, and you're seeing scenes in their hometowns of these doctors arriving with a police escort in front and 10 kilometers of people lined up along the street to cheer them
Wow.
yeah, it's really, really touching. I mean, even Xi Jinping doesn't get a welcome like that when he comes to this town.
Yeah, but
So
it's
they
an
are
incredible
really,
interview. So I definitely will link
yeah.
because everybody should
But
watch that.
definitely. So onto the main point, though, even he was saying that, the COVID-19 tests aren't perfect. Sometimes they had to retest multiple times. And they knew that when they've got these people who have a fever and they've got to really check them carefully. And during that time when we were all hearing from outside, oh, the numbers are fake, there must be so many more. Otherwise, why are they building these hospitals? As if, we're supposed to be more reactive here than proactive. It's like being proactive is such a foreign concept to so many people that they're saying, oh, well, this must mean something.
Yeah.
But granted, we were, and even the doctor was worried because that doctor, he gets his, news through VPN. Also, he follows my YouTube channel. And he was saying he was getting worried also, saying, before he was sent to the hospital, wow, is it really a lot worse than it is? I have a sister-in-law who works in one of the provinces on the front lines, and she was in charge of people who were in their home quarantines. And she would go around from home to home to do their daily temperature checks, make sure they had the food delivered, ask them if they had anything else they needed and things like that. And I asked her, I said, what do you think about these numbers, based on interacting with people? Do you think they're fake? Do you think we really have more numbers than what's really being reported? And she says, no, the numbers, she thinks they're honest. However, she believes that a lot of the suspected cases will turn into confirmed cases. And that was the case because when they changed the metrics of how they tested people, we saw that one day where it
Huge
jumped
spike,
up.
right? They have that.
Exactly. And it's because they were, I can't remember exactly what it was. They were including CTs. They were including all of these other indicators. But people had, we were given so much information also. Like, we were all stuck at home for a really long time. If we had a confirmed case in our building, your whole building would be when you're actually on lockdown, where okay, now your food is delivered to you, you're not allowed to go in and go in and come out. So when we're all at home, we're bored because even if we weren't on a kind of a more strict lockdown, so to speak, like that. Everybody was pretty much participating. You didn't really see people out on the streets. We were really bored at home. But the one thing we had in common was every morning we opened up our app to see how many new cases are there, how many new deaths, how many recoveries. Then there were secondary apps, also city level ones that we would look at. So we would have, we could see on a map our neighborhood and little dots showing up in terms of where the cases were in which building complex. So the closest one to where I am now is just across the street, right across the street from my bar. And I got to be honest with you, it was pretty nerve-wracking to see that report and see, like, it felt like it was closing in on you. It's like, oh, there's one over there now. There's one over there now. So it was worrying for everybody. But I think the most interesting thing for me, because before this even started, it feels like a lifetime ago now, because we've been through so much through such a short period of time. I actually had to go back through my own vlogs to remind myself what was my mindset throughout the whole thing before I'm speaking to you here. And the one thing that I found the most interesting was, it wasn't really the people who were panicking or getting really concerned first. It was really the government doing all of this stuff. And we were just looking at it saying, whoa, is it this serious? Oh, we've got to take it this seriously. Whereas, in Canada, now Canada's taking a lot more action. But I felt like, and my sister's in Germany, I felt like hearing from my family, and it was the opposite. It was the people saying, come on, like, we should do something here. Maybe we should pay attention to this a bit more. But it was the complete opposite here. We started saying, whoa, what's going on, when we started seeing all of these things put in place by the government. So it was quite interesting in that regard.
So the government clearly was prepared for something like this. Like, they must have had a plan in place prior to this, maybe because of SARS outbreak 17 years ago. Maybe then they had this, okay, if this were to happen again, this is what we would do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was quarantined in 2008 because of an H1N1 scare. I was taking a boat from Hong Kong airport to Shenzhen port, and somebody on the boat from South America ended up having a fever. And so we all got put on a bus. We got sent out to a quarantine facility. It was quite nice also. The communication could have been better, but overall it was a pretty good experience. And I think, based on hearing from my friends who are coming back into China now and going into quarantine, it's an even more detailed process now. So absolutely, I definitely think they got a lot of experience from that. And you can only imagine now, after this, how much more prepared they'll be in the future. And they
Yeah.
found all of the, problems along the way. I would say the thing that they moved a bit slowly on initially was controlling the price gouging on masks and things like that. There was an initial rush in the beginning. And, I know in the US and other places, some of the private companies took it on themselves to cancel seller accounts from people who are really price gouging.
Yeah.
Here, it was when the government really caught on to it, they basically, there were some really heavy fines for people who were doing that because they weren't supposed to do that. There was clear rules against it. Then
Did
what
you
they
guys
did
have
was,
a big run on toilet paper?
no, I can't figure that one out. I've been reading articles on it to try to wrap my head around it, and
It's the strangest thing.
yeah.
It just makes Westerners. I don't know. I don't think Europe did that at all because they use bidets over there. But I don't know. And I think did they have the
They
run on
did.
toilet
They had a yeah. They had.
I
a
mean,
run on
it just
toilet paper.
makes the North Americans look like lunatics.
It is a
like
bit
we
silly,
just love our toilet paper.
Yeah. I mean, the best explanation I saw was, it's because they take up so much space on the shelves that when people start taking even a few, it looks like there's a mad rush, and then all you can do is continue on. And then obviously the consequences we're seeing now is that people are using substitutes and clogging up the city, sewage systems and things like that. Like that's, yeah. We never saw any issues like that. The grocery stores were all well stocked.
Really? So, because we're still having problems with the grocery stores. I mean, it's just such a disaster here. Honestly, it is such a disaster. Now they finally, the grocery stores are allowing elderly in for 1 hour, elderly exclusive so that they can get, which is the smartest thing to do because they're going into the grocery stores after it's been fully sanitized.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not getting any of the germs from everybody else coming in, and they're able to get the things that they need. And the cheaper items that, when you're living off Social Security, you can't have everybody taking all the cheap stuff and then you're left with only expensive things you can't afford and you still have to eat, So, I mean, it's just been such a disaster here.
Yeah.
But when you said that you had food, so the buildings that were on lockdown had food delivery.
Right.
What's that? I don't think we have anything like that here.
Well, so if you were depending on the kind of quarantine you were in, if you were in like a quarantine center, the government would provide all the meals to you. But if you were under home quarantine, we could use, there's tons and tons of grocery store delivery apps here. I think it's Alibaba or Tencent. They have their own system, and it actually evolved a lot in 2019. There's so many people just not going to the grocery anymore. They're using these delivery apps. So for self-quarantine, I think people were paying for it themselves, but there were so many options available, and it was perfect timing that this evolved in 2019. Maybe there's another conspiracy theory. This is all because of the supermarkets wanting to improve their,
Right. They're wanting to get a run on the economy. Finally, they're like, all right, here's our chance. Well, here, I've been self-isolating for the last couple of weeks because I am a suspected case. Yeah, they won't give me a test though, because they say that my symptoms aren't severe enough. I'd have to have, I would need to be to the point where I'd maybe need hospitalization before they would give me a test. But I've been self-isolating, and it has been nearly impossible for me to get grocery delivery. Normally I do grocery delivery often normally. So even before this whole ordeal, and I had no problems in the past, and I would use my same company. The last time I attempted to use them, their system took my money and I never got my groceries. And then I contacted them. I can't get a hold of them. They've said we've had to temporarily close. We've had too many orders. And so I didn't get my groceries and I didn't get my money. I've tried various other grocery delivery. I can't get any other groceries. And this is like I'm sitting here thinking I might have this, but I have to eat too. I mean, I can't sit here and starve. And so I can't get any grocery delivery. I can't find any times online. Amazon Fresh, they have grocery delivery. When I fill up my cart. When I go to check out, it says no times are available. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking the only thing I can do is I have to go out there and then risk people's lives. I mean, that's the position our government is putting us in because I have to eat and other people, what is a person supposed to do? So I've had to do food delivery, I'm ordering from restaurants and having them bring it. But even that's risky. The person that's giving me my food, I'm sitting there like trying to stay as far away from them as I can. I'm like, put that on the ground. If they want me to sign something, I say, sign it yourself, but even then it's still this, I mean, it's a mess. It's a total mess. It should be set up a little bit better to those who need to be quarantined, more suspected cases, or government quarantine. Like if they lock down your building, then they have something in place, like they would bring you the food. So the buildings, when the government locked them down and said, you have somebody there, so now you all have to go on lockdown, did they set aside special delivery for them to make sure the residents of those buildings got their food?
So it pretty much tied into the system. The system was already robust enough that we just tied into the existing systems. The only thing I could say is that before all of this happened, and before Chinese New Year, we could place online grocery orders, and we could get our order in 15 to 45 minutes. It's really, really fast.
Right.
But after this started, sometimes you're looking at 2 to 4 hours, or you put your order in the day before. That's the most inconvenience. I think they were limiting the number of staff that were on. There were people that weren't allowed to come back to Shenzhen yet, particularly if they were from Hubei province.
Mm-hmm.
But we've still, I haven't heard of anybody running into that kind of a problem saying, what am I supposed to do now? One of the other things to keep in mind is that all of the government workers in China, and there are a lot of them, it doesn't matter in what capacity, if you're from the tax office, if you're anything, everybody's working on this. Everybody, it's all hands on deck. If there were, one of the things we had to do, which may sound very intrusive to somebody outside of China, is we had to download apps also to use the subway system to get back into our own building complexes. And what it would do is it would track where we were going, and and then what it would do is if we were on the subway together with somebody who ends up being a confirmed case, we would be notified right away. And they'd say, hey, you're really at risk now. Stay at home for now while we figure out what to do. And there was something interesting that came out of that, a realization, because originally the government was asking some of these private companies to hand over this information to them because of what's going on. And from what I understand, they refused. And they said that what you need to do is you need to do what every other company in the world does, even like on Facebook and stuff like that, get them to download a third-party app. And everybody's got to grant permissions to that app, and then you can track them as your own kind of users when they're using this app. And so the interesting thing for me is that a lot of people would assume that the Chinese government could just do this without having to jump through all these hoops, that they just know where you are all the time anyways. But they put this in place for us. And the foreigners, to get back to the point about all hands on deck, the foreigners in China who had trouble, understanding how the app worked or, how to install it, they would have people go to their homes and actually help them and everything like that, and explain it to them, get them to download and install it so that they wouldn't show up at the subway unable to use the subway system because they don't have this app installed. So there's
China's like the Borg.
Are you a Star Trek fan also?
Yeah. And really, China's just like operating a well-oiled machine.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, there's a lot of people here who obviously this was a pretty unfortunate thing, and there's still things to learn from this, but it really made people here just respect the system here so much more, saying, wow, especially when they can kind of contrast it to what's going on outside.
They're seeing chaos, right? Chaos in the rest of the world. I mean, Asia in general was able to get a handle on this really fast and easy, and everywhere in Asia.
Singapore had some good systems. Korea had some good systems. Yeah, absolutely.
Even countries that weren't really affected, like Vietnam, didn't end up having much spread in the country because they do think that there's a weather and humidity linked to how quickly this virus spreads.
I've heard that, yeah.
But, Vietnam had tests made, ready to go. And they just were like, well, we're just not having very many cases. So they ended up sending a bunch of their tests over to Italy. They're like, you guys need these. We don't really.
Wow.
But, the fact that they were still manufacturing their own tests ready to go, they were ready. They just didn't get very many, but they were, right there. And that's just going to show like the Asian mentality, and I know the Asian mentality, being half myself, the differences are stark between my, being a mixed person, seeing my Asian side and how they operate versus my Caucasian side and how that side operates. They both have their wonderful upsides and downsides to both sides for sure. So, in Wuhan, they had obviously a much stricter lockdown. What was theirs like in comparison to yours? How was theirs worse?
So there's was more mandated. So I have a friend who also owns a brew pub in Wuhan, and he basically just had to stay at home. That was it. He had to stay at home. He had his food delivered to him, just not allowed out. So I would say that was it. It was just, it wasn't a suggestion. It was, okay, everybody needs to stay home. You did have a few villages, like I have a nephew in Jiangxi, just outside of the capital, Nanchang. And in his village, during the really, really early stages, they actually got dump trucks and blocked the roads, the main roads out of the village. Now, the village is self-sustainable. You can buy all your vegetables, your food. You have everything you need to live in the village, but they just didn't want people moving around. And they knew they couldn't rely on just trusting people to just do that by themselves. I would say people do, generally speaking, work here together, but they just didn't even want to have a situation like with that guy who got on a JetBlue flight while he was waiting for his coronavirus test, results.
Yeah.
People do that. This isn't a particular country issue. This is just, you will have individuals, and it only takes one or two to just mess it up for everyone and make this really difficult to control. So I would say, yeah, that those are the more extreme things that were done: blocking physical entrances to villages, or saying, no, you absolutely are not allowed to come out.
So it sounds like to me what China did, the contact tracing was probably a big one, to say, okay, if you all have this app and we all know where you are, and then if somebody ends up with it and we can go back through their history and figure out where they were and where everybody and who all was with them because of the GPS and the app. Yep. It sounds like that contract that, and I know South Korea did the same thing with contact tracing. Sounds like that was a huge part of being able to get control of this.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Catching it early, kind of early enough.
Exactly. There were other little things that were done in terms of, catching people who have fevers and saying, okay, you need to go to the fever clinic. Every single business here, whether it's a gas station, supermarket, anything, you have to get your temperature checked before you go in. Everybody, that was the rule. When we opened up here also, when we reopened, we needed to have certain things ready, a disinfectant, masks, the wireless temperature checking, and the government would come by to make sure we had that before they approved us to open again.
Does everybody have to wear a mask at a brew pub right now? How are they going to drink their beer?
So it was actually funny because in the beginning, in the early stages, when coffee shops were allowed to have customers come back in, there was a rule where you had to sit 1.5 or 2 meters apart from each other, or 6 feet, or whatever it is. And it doesn't matter if you were a couple. It doesn't matter if you came in together. And so I had a friend, he went in with his son. Okay, they had to sit aside, a certain distance aside. And when he took off his mask to drink, and while he was speaking, while he was drinking, the Starbucks staff came up to him and said, no. You cannot talk to each other without your mask on. even though they came in together. Right. So, and yeah, and you're gonna find funny, weird things like this when they're going into such overdrive to make sure they control it. You're gonna have some of these things. They say, okay, was that a little bit too much? Probably, but it's better than the alternative, not doing anything at all. You had some other things that some people might consider really weird. For example, I heard that at one point they banned pharmacies from selling cough syrup. And their concern with that was that if people wanted to kind of self-treat themselves, and particularly because your lungs are filling up and stuff like that, if you go and you try to suppress your cough with cough medicine, you're going to put yourself at huge risk. And also the community, obviously, if you're just trying to, wander around while this is happening.
Yeah, you're trying to suppress your symptoms. And I heard of people doing that, taking some Tylenol, to pass the fever check type thing.
Yeah, there were some people who were fined for that. There was one person who came into China, suppressed their fever because they wanted to get tested and checked in China, because I think they weren't getting the necessary treatment or attention, or couldn't even get tested back home. And so they flew into China and took the fever medication. And people were really not happy about that. But
so what we saw over here was, when Wuhan shut down, we saw videos of people being dragged off, women that were shoved into vans. They were unwilling. They didn't want to go. They were fighting back. You had these men in these hazmat suits trying to wrestle a woman into a van. And of course, the sentiment over here was, wow, this dictatorship, this is draconian, this is absurd. And now here we are in a lockdown that's, now they're ticketing people that go outside. At least that's what the mayor said, or I think it was the mayor I was watching on the news, and he said, we're ticketing. It's a misdemeanor if you go out there. But I mean, so obviously that's because they were being forced into a quarantine. Is that right? So they had been they
So
tested
yeah,
positive.
there were a lot of things where people weren't cooperating. There were some videos, and the Chinese government, they were releasing these videos themselves online, also through their own public accounts. Like, they weren't trying to hide the ones where there was, for example, somebody who had a fever at a highway check, and they didn't want to cooperate, and they said, "That's it, you got to get out." And they're trying to pull them out, and they have training for this stuff. They're actually putting this stuff online. There were some other stuff that were things from previous events that were misrepresented. As you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of fake news that comes out during this time also. Like, for example, there was, and just things taken out of context. Like, there was one with the medical workers walking, or they looked like they were masked up and they had guns and stuff like that, and they were walking. For what I understand, they were responding to a specific incident, because there still are going to be incidents that police need to respond to. But if police are responding to any sort of a domestic issue or anything like that, they are going to be masked up like that when they're moving around outside. The videos of the people kind of being locked into their apartments and stuff like that, I don't know if it's true or not, but to be honest, I wouldn't doubt it. I would think that if there were some people who just were not listening, they kept going out. I think that probably happened. You can be guaranteed that they would have had their food delivered to them and all of that stuff. Was it too much? Was it too far? Maybe. This is a really difficult thing to say during a time like this. What's the alternative? Put them into a prison with other people and then just let it spread in the prison or something like that, if they really are refusing to cooperate? I don't know. I think it's a really hard thing to judge, but I will say that this is the stuff that China needs to learn from during this time also. And there were provincial governments that came out with statements that they handed down to local police and local governments saying, listen, don't go too far with this. Make sure you're respecting the rights of people and stuff like that. There are official press releases where I think the provincial governments recognize that in some cases what they're seeing is people are going too far with this enforcement. And
well, you're always going to have that, that police officer who has a bit of a power trip. We don't have that problem in the United States at all.
Yeah. And you can imagine the kind of stress that they're going through too. They're out there and they're going through. They're the ones on the front line, expected to deal with this. The videos of the doctors who are breaking down and yelling and stuff like that. I mean, people look at that also and say, "Oh, how terrible China is! Look at this! Look at how they're being." This is going to be a stressful time for everybody, including frontline medical workers. Obviously, the doctor that I spoke to, he was part of the second wave, and they weren't facing as many equipment shortages and all this kind of stuff, and they had their processes in place by that point. But yeah, you're going to see some stuff that definitely needs to be reviewed here and needs to be done better the next time around. Hopefully, there's not a next time, but yeah.
So you said that you were in quarantine at one point back in 2008?
That's correct, yeah.
And what was that like?
So yeah, we had to sit on the bus. They had these kind of CDC workers with masks and suits coming on the boat, checking all of our details, our travel history. Then we got put on a bus. There was a medical worker at the front explaining to us in English what was going on, how they need to test one person that they had taken away for H1N1. We were driving down the highway. One funny scene was when we got to the toll booth at the highway, they didn't want to open the window to speak to the lady at the toll booth, and they were trying to explain. And then they wrote on it and put it up to the window that there might be some H1N1 suspected cases on the bus. And then she covered her mouth and waved the bus. And she's like, go, go, go. Then yeah, we got to the facility. We each had a room. They delivered food to us, everything like that. And it was, I think we stayed there for 2 nights. And then the test results came back for the other guy that he didn't have H1N1, and we could all go. But they took our contact details down, how they could reach us just in case anything else came up. And it was pretty well organized. During the time we were in the quarantine facility, I think the communication probably could have been a little bit better. And I was worrying a little bit. I was like, well, what's going on? And I actually, I contacted, I didn't know too much about China at that point. So I had triangulated my location on my BlackBerry and then sent it to the Canadian consulate and said, hey, I'm here, can somebody get some answers for me? And everything was fine in the end. And it was, other than the communication, everything else was pretty good. Were
you able to contact your family or friends?
Yeah. I was speaking to my parents from there also, and
so you had your phone, and you weren't like, they didn't take all your stuff from you.
Yeah.
And then,
I mean, there's people. Yeah, sorry.
What was your sleeping like? I mean, you said you were there for 2 nights?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it was fine. It was a really nice, quiet area. I've still got pictures of it somewhere. It's overlooking a like some sort of a lake. It's like luxury.
But I mean,
It's
did
pretty
you have
good.
was it like bunks, and
Oh no,
you
but
all
it was a big room with a bed, my own bathroom. It was
Oh, so it was like a
yeah.
hotel room.
It was almost like some sort of an inn or like a resort kind of a
Oh, a
thing somewhere in
resort. Oh, they
it
take
was
you
it
to
was almost
resorts for quarantine.
yeah, it was
Shoot.
somewhere in between that. Yeah.
So now, yeah, so that was kind of that's just kind of because we when we imagine people being taken away into a quarantine facility, it's like, oh gosh, do you get to talk to your friends and family? Do you just disappear? Do they know? Does your family know how you're doing? That is the one thing that's kind of breaking my heart about this whole virus thing, not just in China, but all around the world, is that there are people that are now in hospitals, whether they're fighting the virus or whether they have some other issue that has come up that is life threatening, and their family members are not able to go see them. They're locking everybody out of the hospitals, even in my hometown of Idaho. So Idaho gets criticized for being one of my home state of Idaho. Idaho
Mm.
gets criticized for being slow to reaction.
Okay.
But even Idaho being slow to react, the hospitals still pretty much locked down and said you're only allowed one visitor and one visitor only. And I just think, my gosh, there's people dying in these hospitals every day. I mean, people die, 150,000 people die every day in the world. So these people that are dying all around the world, 150,000 a day, um, they're in these hospitals that are in lockdown. They're allowed one
Right.
family member, if not in some cases, like in Italy, no family members are in complete quarantine, and these people are just dying alone.
Yeah, it's a really difficult thing right now in so many ways. I mean, you imagine the medical workers also that have to deal with this overload of patients, that have to deal with upset and angry people who can't go in to see their family.
And no updates, they don't know, like, how are they? Are they alive? Are they dead? I mean, just the stress of the whole
Yeah.
thing is, unbelievable
Yeah,
to
yeah. I
me.
mean, it's really difficult, obviously, to prepare for something like this, to imagine that something like this will happen. But the best we can do everywhere is just look at this and see what were the worst parts of this experience and how can we prevent it from happening in the future. I mean, this is going to be a massive learning experience for everybody. We haven't seen something like this in obviously a long time.
So what is the feeling like now? So you were in lockdown starting when? Like, when did you start? When did you have to close your pub and go home?
So we were closed for Chinese New Year anyways. We closed for a few days during Chinese New Year, and then when this all started getting serious, we said, okay, well, we're not going to open. We're going to stay closed. There was actually mandates here where bars or nightclubs or places that kind of have a lot of packed in people, they weren't allowed to open anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Restaurants that remained open during Chinese New Year could continue doing business, but mostly just for delivery and takeaway. So now everything's really starting to get back to normal. We can accept
But this is like 2
customers.
months later, so it's like
This is
2
this is
months.
yeah, this is 2 months later. With really strict controls and being able to track everybody and really kind of get this under control. So the schools are still closed, though. The date for the schools to reopen kept getting pushed out. They say we will reopen next month. That looks like it might happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if they push it out further.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of kids are getting their schoolwork at home. You're seeing a lot more people walking out on the streets now, but everybody's still wearing masks. The Shenzhen government said that if you are going outside and you're not around very large crowds of people, you no longer need to wear a mask. We're pretty safe here, but everybody's still doing it. It's a habit that people have now. And I actually have a funny story. One of my friends who lives on the other side of town in Lohu district, he went outside and he forgot to put his mask on. And people were looking at him so strange. And he suddenly realized I didn't put my mask on, and he literally felt naked, he said. And so, yeah. And so he quickly rushed back to put his mask on. And it's amazing how it's so opposite, in the West. If you're wearing a mask, people are looking at you like,
Yeah,
oh,
like you're
what's,
a freak. Like, what's wrong with
yeah.
you? Yeah.
And it's the
Although now it's
complete
more
opposite.
common. If you
Oh,
go
okay,
out
good.
now and you look around at and I mean, people are definitely more and more wearing masks from what I can see.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, It makes sense. I mean, we know that this spreads while you're asymptomatic, and people say, "Oh, it won't prevent me from catching, the virus from someone else, but it will catch me from spreading it." Well, that's good. We should do that
Right,
then,
right.
and that's why it's a community effort. And the other thing too is when you're
If you
wearing a
can
mask.
find masks and gloves. I mean, I
Yeah,
can't find a mask or gloves. I luckily have one little bottle of sanitizer so that, because I live in an apartment building, I have to do my laundry. I still have to go downstairs to get the food. I have to touch things. I don't have any gloves. I mean, this is the thing that's so ridiculous about this is here I am thinking I might have it. So I
yeah,
carry a towel around, to open up
yeah.
everything. And I make sure I sanitize my hands before I touch any, before I go out there, even with the towel. And I mean,
Right.
it's just
Yeah.
such a nightmare.
There's a lot of new mask factories opening up here, and the supply is pumping out. I'm actually planning on potentially visiting one on Monday and doing a tour, like a video tour of what they're doing, talking to them about what the demand has been like, if they can keep up with orders. And at the end of the day, a lot of us have a habit, and I have it too. I didn't realize it until this started happening, of touching your face.
Yeah.
Once in a while, and that's the other thing that the mask does also is it prevents you from being able to touch your mouth and nose. And I think overall it's a pretty good idea. But yeah, that's the problem: is how do we make sure that everybody's got enough supply? That's the biggest constraint right now.
Yeah, I mean, so many people hoarded all of this and they didn't
Yeah.
even think about,
So
what about the older people that are going to need them? They need them the most and yet they can't
right.
even get them.
So that's one thing they did here too. Was halfway through this, they put a law in place where the pharmacies here were only allowed to sell 2 N95 masks per person per day, and you need to use your ID card to buy it with. And the price was very reasonable. It was like I think it worked out to like $1 US for an N95 mask.
Mhm.
Now, not many people are wearing N95 masks here, but it's really good to know that you can go and get it in case you do have to take your kids to the hospital for something, or you're going to be going into a high risk environment and you want to use something a little bit better.
Mhm.
But that's how they handled it. And I know there's a lot of people who are opposed to this idea, talking about price controls or things. They're saying, well, that's not how our society works. It's just supply and demand, and this
Well,
is
in a
what
time
creates.
like this, that's how it needs to work because that's a health
Yeah.
risk. This is health
uh,
and endangerment of other
w-
people if you hoard
well,
it.
yeah. Yeah, well, there's that, and then it's like, at what point do you say our city sewage system is overflowing into the streets because people are now using,
Yeah.
alternatives to flush down the toilet? At what point do you say, okay, maybe in situations like this, we can have a little bit more flexibility in terms of price controls and quantity controlling and stuff like that? I mean, that's my personal opinion, but I know there's a lot of people who disagree with that.
Well, if they say, everybody else stay home except for essential workers, they can put categories on people. Why don't they put categories on goods and say in times when we call a national emergency or a statewide emergency or whatever it might be, then those goods automatically go on to like a system where you can only
Yeah,
buy so much at a time on certain goods.
yeah,
Clearly
yeah, yeah,
toilet paper. In the
yeah.
US, that's the
Apparently.
first thing. It's the most essential
We
item.
We saw that in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, we saw that too. And there were on the mainland side. That I think it happened in Hong Kong before it happened in the U.S. And the mainland side, we were just looking over, like, what's going on? We were seeing these images of Twitter, where because people's apartments are really small in Hong Kong, and there's pictures from people taking a picture of other people's homes, and you can see their window is completely covered by packs of toilet paper that they bought and stocked up on. Now, like 20% of their house is filled by toilet paper.
Oh
So
my gosh.
yeah,
It's so
yeah,
terrible. So what is
it
the
is.
sentiment like now? What are you guys thinking? Because, um, there are still cases in China that are found every day, but very few. So something
Yeah.
like 40 or less than 100 every
And,
day.
and a lot of them are coming in from outside, so it's an
Mhm.
interesting dynamic. So people are feeling really, really safe on the ground here, but they're aware that the biggest risk is a second wave potentially coming back in from outside.
Yeah.
And it's created an unfortunate situation where foreigners are being treated kind of suspiciously. The fact of the matter is that even it's more likely that a Chinese had traveled overseas and come back, but they're not visually identifiable outside. So people are getting a little bit nervous around foreigners now. And we've even seen some places like gyms going as far as saying, we're really sorry, but some of our other customers might be nervous and we can't accept foreign customers right now. And that's an unfortunate thing. But the government saw that this is a problem from quite early on, and they've released guides in terms of anti-discrimination guides about respecting foreigners' privacy, space, even in respecting their religion, which some people won't believe is on the document also. And also, they play videos in the subway stations, and all the subway stations, they talk about not discriminating against people and trying to explain that this is irrational. And so it's really encouraging. So although it's unfortunate to, as me, as a foreigner who's been on the ground for this entire thing, to all of a sudden now face that issue. I haven't personally had any sort of discrimination against me, but I've heard from some friends who have, but it is something they're working on. And I think it's a really big contrast compared to when leaders right at the top of your country is, in certain countries are saying things like calling it the Chinese virus.
Well, yeah, like our lovely Trump, who's going around saying the China virus, the Chinese virus.
Despite knowing what that does. I mean, the World Health Organization decided that this is a good idea to not name it after places after the swine flu, because when we referred to H1N1 as swine flu in the beginning, it caused a panic around the world where people were just slaughtering pigs, even though it was a human-to-human transmission problem at that point. And the interesting thing for me, what I said before, was that if you try to explain to people we shouldn't call H1N1 swine flu because of these implications to innocent pigs around the world, they'd be like, okay, all right, that kind of makes sense. But then when you explain to them we shouldn't call this the Chinese virus because Asian people are getting beat up in the streets, some of those same people are going to be like, well, no, it came from there, so I'm taking a stand on this. It's like, really, come on.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting that you're experiencing, that foreigners in China are experiencing the discrimination. When over here, it's the Asians that are experiencing the discrimination. So
I got to clarify, though. It's nothing like, we're not seeing a kind of assaults or anything like that. It's just people. It's a nervousness. And in that regard, people who were from Wuhan, if people knew you were from Wuhan, if you were Chinese, they would be nervous around them also. So it's not really specifically a race issue per se, but we are visually identifiable. And it just so happens that the virus is mostly coming in from outside. But again,
and from here, we're thinking it's coming from China. And so it's like interesting how both sides are kind of looking at the other like it's now. You. Yeah. But people are asking me all the time if I feel any discrimination or if I'm experiencing any of that. I don't think I look Asian enough for people to automatically look at me and think, oh, she's from China. She's but my mom, who's Vietnamese, a lot of people can't tell the difference between Vietnamese and Chinese and Korean, and and I don't blame them if they're not too familiar. But I don't, but my mom lives in an all Asian area, mostly Vietnamese area, so she's not really experiencing any of that. And I was in Idaho quite a bit the last month, and I didn't, when this was all starting to come out, and we were seeing a lot of the stuff coming from China, and nobody ever said a single thing to me, even in Idaho. So I mean, I'm sure that there are maybe, I've definitely heard of stories of people not wanting to order from the Chinese restaurant or not wanting to visit Chinatown because they're more afraid of, have they been to China to visit their family? And have they come back and brought it? So, I made an effort in the very beginning when this was happening to order Chinese food every day, even though, American Chinese, it's obviously not real Chinese food. But, I was ordering Chinese food, even though I don't even really like American Chinese food, but I was ordering it anyway. Just to, give them.
The thing is, I mean, I think in some cases when you're seeing these attacks, it might be just people who are, to start off with, are kind of racist or bigoted, and now they have an excuse to kind of let it out. And to the people, and I did a podcast on this to kind of encourage people, saying we will get through this. This happens. After 9/11, it was brown people who were targeted. I'm mixed also. My father is white from England. My mother is from South America, from Guyana, and obviously I'm brown, and I definitely felt a change in the atmosphere, and I definitely had to take my shoes off for an additional inspection at the airport more often, after those incidents, and it does. It was an awkward situation for a period of time, but it passes, and somebody else is going to be the target the next time. And I think the best thing we can do is use this as a learning opportunity for people who are experiencing this now. They're more likely to stand up against it when they see it happening to the next group of people, and they can kind of empathize with them a bit more. So I think, it's important to kind of take whatever we can to learn from this.
For sure. I mean, as a kid growing up, I had to deal with it a little bit because I am Vietnamese. And I did have a couple of run-ins as a kid with Vietnam vets that were not, they would be a bit mean about me being Vietnamese, and they would maybe call me a name. They,
Yeah.
they would laugh it off and think they were kidding, kind of. But it definitely stuck with me a little bit. And so whenever I'd meet somebody who was a Vietnam vet when I was younger, I'd get a little nervous. Like, oh, if I tell them when they ask me what I am, if I tell them I'm Vietnamese, are they gonna, say something kind of
Yeah, yeah.
offensive?
I mean, I grew up in an all white kind of town just north of Toronto, and so of course I experienced that also. But I'm glad I did though, because all of these experiences really shape the
Mm,
way we think about things, and we're able to comment on it when it's happening again to someone else. But
right. And
yeah,
ultimately, those guys were absolutely of no consequence to my life. I mean, they couldn't do anything except maybe say something. And then what? It was like, okay, loser. you
I
know?
like what, yeah, I like what Ricky Gervais says. He talks about haters on Twitter and stuff like that, and you know how
Yeah.
bad they can get on Twitter. And his take was like, they're literally yelling at me from a garbage can. What is? Yeah.
Right.
So you
So,
just don't let it
this
bother you.
this is going to be obviously, I think what we're realizing now is that this virus, and even today, Dr. Fauci here in the US said that this is looking like it's not going anywhere, that it's looking like it is spread too far around the world, that it is now going to be seasonal. It's probably kind of going to come roaring back in the fall. And because, right, as soon as we get control over it here, Australia is probably going to have a spike because it does look like it's maybe spreading with weather. Brazil, it's just too far gone now. And so, are over there in China, are people starting to realize that, at some point we're going to have to open our borders up really again? People are going to we have to resume a life of normalcy again. And this virus is probably going to come back with a second wave. Is there any talk of that and what you guys will do?
So I just received, and I didn't get a chance to look at it yet, but I just received something this morning where they said that the borders are completely closed to foreigners now. Because my friend sent me a warning. They
Yeah.
said, if I was planning on leaving, just don't leave anytime soon because I won't be allowed back in. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe there is still some hope, no matter how little it is, that people will start taking this seriously. I mean, even if that's true, I hope that people don't use it as an excuse to just start relaxing, because I think the key will be, even if that is true, is to buy us enough time to wrap our heads around this and figure out what the best treatments are, perhaps get a vaccine in place and all this stuff. So I worry that by saying that, it makes people relax a little bit too much and just say, you
Mhm.
know what, we're all going to get it anyways.
Well,
I
that's
think
kind of my attitude, to be honest with you. I'm kind of like, at this point, um, I think China tried plan A as best as possible, which honestly, if you're the epicenter of a breakout, it is your moral and ethical obligation to attempt, which is
right,
lock down and try to
mhm,
get rid of this thing, right? Just try to
right,
isolate it and eradicate it from the human population so that it doesn't end up becoming part of our seasonal viruses.
right.
And so that is plan A. And I think China had an effort at that, but unfortunately, it is just too late. And now we have to really deal with the consequences of plan B. And plan B is, well, there's just no way we're going to be able to wait this out for a vaccine. That's a year and a half to 2 years away. If they really sped it up, it would maybe be in a year. But then you have to ask yourself if you're willing to take a vaccine that has been rushed. I know I'm
Right.
not. I'm not willing
Right.
to have them inject something into me that they rushed through, and because they're desperate to open the economy, they're
Mhm.
desperate to get back to normal, and then they inject us all with something crazy. Um,
Right.
so unfortunately, I think at this point, we're getting more and more data, obviously, about what this virus is, how deadly it is for certain demographics, and it's about um, protecting that particular demographic, and the rest of us are just going to have to get to a point of herd immunity, whether it be through vaccines or getting it and becoming immune, if that's possible. But unfortunately,
Yeah,
you
again, yeah,
know
I think buying ourselves time is still important, and again, the risk of people focusing on that too much, and it's a valid argument, and it's probably what we're going to have to deal with. But we can see what it looks like when hospitals become overwhelmed with this, and we can see that it's
right,
not only
right.
people with this who are going to be affected, just like you spoke about those other people who aren't able to visit their family in the hospitals for completely unrelated issues right now. And if we just all of a sudden just embrace that idea that says, "Oh, we're all going to get it anyways," it's just going to be too much at once.
Yeah, certainly
China,
too much at once. We'd have to come up with a plan. But I
right?
think starting that conversation and acknowledgement first, if we just remain in denial, we'll never even come up with a plan. So we're just slowing down the process of even coming up with a plan. So
Right, yeah. I mean, I personally think that. I agree with some of the measures that were taken by places like Singapore and Korea. It's too late for that because they
too many
controlled
people
it from
have it.
very
I
early
mean,
on.
now the UK, the Imperial College of London, when they originally came out with the study saying that millions were going to die, they were the ones that came out with that. Well, now they came out with a kind of an adjusted model today, and they said, well, actually, we don't think it's going to. They actually said, well, actually, we think way more people have it than we originally thought. They're saying that they think maybe up to 50% of the UK already has it. So,
wow.
if it's spread that fast, and we are, because maybe it is a super spreader, and it just goes whoosh, all over.
I think there should probably be the doctor that I spoke to. He's working on testing people to see what kind of antibodies they have to actually prove that they already had it. And I think instead of just assuming this, they should actually follow up with this and test them and say, okay, is this really actually true? Because there's a lot of talk and a lot of narrative like this that does push us towards the risk of just giving up a little bit too early. China has proven you can control this, but what's the likelihood of other countries doing the same thing as China? It's
too much.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, even South Korea said we're not doing that. They said we're not doing that because we're a democratic republic. It doesn't work for us. And then meanwhile, the West, which is supposed to be where democracy was born, goes and says, we're locking down. And if you exit, in France, they're ticketing people quite a bit. And there's a bit of even violence that people are reporting from going out, and then the police gathering them up and saying, get out of here. So, but, I guess my take on it is I feel like it's kind of time to face some facts a little bit. And it comes down to the sooner we have that understanding that it's not likely now. I mean, it was a heroic effort. It was a heroic attempt. And I do think you should absolutely try to isolate and eradicate the minute you see a new virus pop up. And I think that's a lesson that probably China is learning, is that the minute a doctor says, hey, we got something, it's kind of weird, never seen this before, to take that seriously. Don't silence the doctor. Of course, you have to manage a bit of, obviously, public panic is something that also is a type of virus that has to be managed as well.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's the thing also is, we there's not much. I mean, so China has censorship. Everybody knows that. But there's no, this might sound odd, but no transparency to the censorship. I had this idea that I think China should, at the end of each year, tell its people what it censored and why they censored it, with reasons.
It'd be nice if YouTube would do that too, right?
Yes, exactly. That's a good point. But I think one of the things we don't know, and the data that we're not working with, is how many times did something similar happen where a doctor who wasn't even in that category, who was, I believe he was an optometrist, how many times before did a doctor want to do the same thing and it would have caused panic on something that actually really did turn out to be nothing? We don't have that information.
Right.
So it's really hard from the outside to just say, okay, they need to do this differently. At the end of the day, they still genome sequenced it pretty quickly. They still released all of the information to the public so people could prepare their test kits and everything like that. I probably do think there are some things that they're going to learn from this and they're going to do differently next time, but maybe not as extreme. Maybe it won't be as different as people imagine. Because again, we don't have the information for how many times did they do this and it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, it is true. It's like you can't just take every doctor that comes out and says, I see something and it's, we got to alert everybody, because that would be every day. Every day there, we see it all the time. The conspiracy theorists that are alerting the public to XYZ that is going to be harmful to them. And I mean, just imagine if we took every single one seriously right out of the gate and then just said, everybody hunker down, it's coming, the end of the world. This is it. This is the plague. So, I mean, it is hard to criticize reaction, and it's, it's like, okay, what was the right thing? What was the wrong thing to do? In this case, it turned out that doctor was right. Right. But how, like you said, how many times are they wrong and saying the same thing? So that is where it gets really interesting. But yeah, I just was wondering what the sentiment was over there. We are starting to hear now every day, like Dr. Fauci came out today during the press conference, and this was the first time he said, yeah, like it's looking like we're not getting rid of this and it's going to come back seasonally. So we're hearing more and more doctors saying, we kind of failed at that. So.
Yeah. From the sentiment on the ground here, I don't, at least the people I spoke to, I don't get the sense that they think this is not going to be controlled outside of China, that it's inevitably going to come back to China from the outside. They see all the controls being put in place. And you're right, though. I mean, how long can they keep themselves isolated? But people aren't thinking about that right now. I mean, we saw the lengths that China went to control this domestically, how many businesses they shut down, how much of the economy they sacrificed for this. So who knows? Who knows how long they're going to hold out and just say, okay, nobody's coming in. If you guys want herd immunity, okay, we wait until you know, it's not, spreading
Yeah, it'll be
anymore or
interesting
whatever.
to see because, the problem with it now, I think what this kind of showed was that there has to be but it's like, how do you do this? There has to be a worldwide effort, an immediate worldwide effort that the minute when China came out in January and said, we got a problem, everybody in the world, every nation in the world would have needed to immediately react exactly the same in uniform. And it's like, how is that going to happen with all of the various nations, all the different cultures, all the different wealths in each nation? Some are more well equipped than others. I mean, so to have a blanket strategy, which is kind of what was needed, is kind of impossible.
Yeah, that raises that reminds me of a really interesting comment I got on one of my videos. They spoke about how when this happened and Wuhan was the hardest hit area, China sent doctors all over the country there, all hands on deck. Obviously they had some skeleton staff behind and just in case, but they put as much effort as they could on Wuhan. And you would think somewhere like the EU, when Italy had this crisis, that other EU countries could do the same thing. They say, okay, we're coming. We're gonna put all our effort together with you and fix this.
No, it was the Chinese that showed up first.
Yeah, I mean, I even saw I saw on Twitter I don't know how real it is. I saw an Italian guy taking down the EU flag and raising the Chinese flag because of this, like
because it was
protest.
the Chinese that came to Italy's rescue before anybody else. The Chinese were on the ground, and that is like, I mean, you're right. Where were the Germans? Where were the Brits? Where were the French? Where were they? They just let Italy struggle. And Italy has the second best healthcare system in the world. One of the reasons why Italy is hit so hard is because of their excellent healthcare system. People don't realize that, but they have the second oldest population in the world behind Japan, and they have the second best healthcare system in the world. And so because they've been able to keep their population alive for longer, unfortunately for them, they ended up having a very old population. They have the oldest population in the EU, and this virus tends to really like older folks. And these people were already on kind of extensive life-saving treatments already, and this virus came and said, no, now's the time. And so it actually kind of gives credit to Italy's healthcare system to show that they were able to keep people alive longer than other nations, but unfortunately, then the virus came.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
So I mean, go ahead.
Well, the point of the world needed to be in a cohesive, needed to react all as one. A big Borg, a world Borg, right, needed to be formed. And suddenly the world needed to react. And, China can't control the world. China can only control China. So China did what they could do. But then I'm sure they sat there and expected the rest of the world to react. And the rest of the world kind of sat around saying, oh, okay, we'll see. And maybe to China's shock and horror. But now, unfortunately, if we do go the strategy even of herd immunity, which I do think is unfortunately what we have to do at this point. I don't think there's a way around it. But then the whole world has to be in on that too. It can't just be one country does it and another country doesn't. Right now Sweden is doing it. They're just saying we're going to develop herd immunity. The Netherlands and the UK, when they realized this was too out of hand and that they were just too far gone already, they said to their population, this is what we want to do because plan A, we're beyond that now. We have to do herd immunity. But that freaks people out. And I understand it's scary. It's, you're saying to people, you're going to get a virus. And nobody wants to be told that. That's an extremely scary thing to tell somebody, especially when the media is out there saying, and you're going to die. Right. Because they're saying the death rates are not what the media is, really what social media is more circulating around. The Germans who have excellent data and the Chinese who have excellent data are showing that is not actually the case so much. But, again, that would have to be a worldwide concerted effort. And I think emotionally, even though I think that is the only real logical, that's unfortunately the path forward. Human emotion is not ready to accept that. Human emotion is not ready. And then we'd have to have a worldwide concerted effort of, okay, now that we know that we have to do that, of course we can't just say, everybody go get it. You can't
Right.
do that
Yeah.
because there's certain vulnerable
Well, I mean,
population.
yeah, in terms of controlling the timing, our medical system is not ready to deal with that
Right.
either.
We have to build it up. Yeah.
Yeah, and from what I understand with the doctors here, they're doing a lot of follow-up testing on people who had this now, and they are checking to see if there are any long-term effects to their health. There's some
Right.
reports of people still showing lesions in the
Lungs,
chest
yeah.
and all this kind of stuff. This is pretty new, so the idea to say that too quickly also, we need to make sure that we really know, are there any long-term effects from this, and all kinds of other questions we need answered. If there is a effective drug around the corner, can we just, add a little bit of time to it? I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean, it would be great if there was a drug that could maybe treat the symptoms, but again, you're risking it. I mean, at the end of the day, even if they came out with a drug and said, okay, look, we've got a drug that it's not a vaccine, but this drug will at least it will help with, the symptoms a bit. You're still
right.
risking it. It's still risky. You're still telling somebody you're going to get a virus. But hey, if you get it, we can at least maybe help you,
Yeah. Yeah, my key is try to get us. Well, my opinion is to get us to a point where people are. It's okay to get this virus now because we have the capacity to handle it. We have the medical system ready for it. We know already what the most effective treatments are.
Right.
And so that's my only fear about people just saying, of course, accepting the fact that this is probably where it's going to go. It's going to be herd immunity, but to make sure people aren't using that to just go on some sort of a boat cruise somewhere now with a bunch of other people because they know they're going to get it anyways,
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have to be careful with it, but at the same time, I mean, we can't fight Mother Nature forever. I mean, we can try our best, but she's going to unleash things on us, and I mean, it's this isn't going to be the last time that
No.
this
Yeah.
happens.
And
So
that's the key is to make sure we're learning as much as we can from this. And that was one of the things I mentioned also was that there are places that are focusing so much effort on blaming China that they may not even look to China for examples of, okay, what can we learn from how they controlled it, how they handled it, how they treated it. Jack Ma from Alibaba, he released a really big guide also with all the best practices, all the things he noticed that in a particular hospital that worked and didn't work. I mean, I hope people, because of their focus on just blaming right now, that they don't forget that there's a lot of valuable information they can take out from here.
yeah, I mean, what I learned from this whole thing was I hope every major, every new virus that breaks out in the world that unleashes to the world starts in China. That's what I hope, because I can count on the Chinese to do everything possible to try to get rid of the thing. To go to extraordinary measures.
I know what you're saying, and I said the same thing, but you got to be really careful about how you say it. It's like, unfortunately, we wouldn't wish that China gets another virus, but the world will be the same. Yeah, right. I know what you're saying.
If it's going to originate anywhere, you want it to originate in the safest possible place where people are going to say
with the highest chance of containment.
Yeah. And that obviously is China. I mean, to build a hospital in 10 days, that was clearly a plan that was in place. To have, everything that was done to tamp down on this thing so quickly and to be able to control it. I mean, now, unfortunately, China's going to have to ask the question of now what? Now if we open up the borders, they're just going to come flooding back in. And that is what they've seen in Asia, is that anytime any of the restrictions have been relaxed, like in Singapore or Taiwan,
Macau also,
they get a spike in cases. And so, the question is, do we live in a new world where we close the borders for the next 2-3 years because even if they come up with a vaccine, then you've got to make a decision. Are you going to mandate that everybody take it?
Yeah.
And then how long will it take to get 350 million Americans, for example, vaccinated? 350 million. I mean, that's going to take a year of full-time round-the-clock work.
Obviously, the mandated thing would be a little bit easier here. I mean, even to get into schools, you need to have your vaccines up to date. You don't really have that choice here to say, I'm not vaccinating my kids and we're still going to send them to school with everybody else. But that's not really possible elsewhere.
So even if they get this vaccine in the next year, you're still looking at before any of, to 7.7 billion people in the world, how are we going to do this? How are we going to pull this off? I mean, maybe the better route is if there's just a drug to treat it if you catch it. It's like, okay, we're not going to really go the vaccine route, but if you catch it, we at least have some drugs that'll prevent you from,
right,
going too far. But, most of these people, like in Italy, they said that the majority of those who passed were in their 80 was the average age with 3 severe conditions. Who knows if they could even take that medication that would help?
right,
That's the other
There's
thing. If they have too many pre-existing conditions, it interacts with other of their medications. And I mean, there's just so much. It would take years and years before we really can understand this. And the world has never done this before. What we've never done was trying to actually defeat Mother Nature, by trying to outsmart her somehow.
Yeah.
We've never tried this. So
we're in new territory here for sure. Yeah.
It is definitely new. So trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to ask you about your experience over there in China. I mean, do you feel, so you're living under a dictatorship, we're all thinking, oh man, why would you want to live like that? Do you feel like you're censored? Do you feel like you're limited?
No.
Are you going to get in trouble talking to me? Are they coming to arrest you? Are they outside?
Yeah, they're at
Are
the
they
door.
listening to this conversation? Are they spying?
It's a respectful dictatorship. There's police standing outside my door waiting for me right now. No.
They're at least letting you finish.
There's such a misunderstanding about how things work here, and there's more doing these kinds of things that they're doing. They care about the rights of a group more than they do an individual. And as a result, an individual ends up being more safe and in many ways having more rights that the government can come in and do stuff like this. There are feedback systems here. There's a system called the MBLL where the public can go online and make a public complaint about the government. And it's public for everybody to see. And it's also the reply from the government is public for everybody to see.
And then when that person gets arrested and they disappear, that's also public for everybody to see. How does that work?
This is, I mean, that's a really, really deep rabbit hole where you start talking about some of these people who are working together with, overseas NGOs and stuff like that, and trying to put certain mechanisms in place here, which look like they were just written word for word by organizations like the NED and stuff like that. I'm going to get into that. That's a whole different thing. Maybe we can talk about another day, but the people here, I mean, one of my favorite things. The reason I started following you and somebody sent me your stuff was the thing that you did on the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and you were able to clear up so many misunderstandings about that also. And if people are just really so convinced that there's a cultural genocide going on here, why would the Uyghurs not be expected to follow the one-child policy when that was going on? Also, they weren't restricted to that. They
were able to have as many kids as they wanted, whereas everybody else was only told one.
In certain areas, they had some that were allowed 2, and then certain areas unlimited. You had in the last 20, 30 years, you've had 25,000 mosques built. There's 3 here in Shenzhen. And, the kids, I know some people, they're ethnic minority Muslims from Qinghai. They send their kids there to learn Arabic and on the weekends. They have 10 Islamic colleges. The entry requirements and all the schools are lower for Muslims. When friends my age were in school here, Muslims were allowed to carry their big kind of spiritual dagger or knife, whatever it's called, to school. There's just... Right.
They have like affirmative action for Muslims, and people don't realize... that it's an affirmative action plan for them.
And it's a level of affirmative action that would put any affirmative action program anywhere in the world to shame. And so that's just addressing only one thing, but it's really tiring. During the Hong Kong protest thing, I tried doing that where I was addressing these things one by one, and it's never ending. And some people just believe what they want to believe. I think the most, a lot of people have given up trying to convince anybody. And I think the most insulting thing is for Chinese who have access to the outside internet. They access the world by VPN. They go and they study in schools overseas, and they still say they love their country and they love their government. And if they don't strictly agree with all of the Westerners' criticisms about the government, they're just brandished as brainwashed. So it's like people don't really want the Chinese to have free thought. They just want them to agree with them. And it's something I've been tackling with some of my content, but
I can tell you, as a kid growing up, it was hard for my parents to understand each other. They were divorced, but I was playing translator, and it wasn't about language. It was about culture, just translating culture. They just, my dad would be like, "Oh, your mother's side does this, and they, what's about that?" And they're this, XYZ, whatever it might be. They're not friendly. They're colder. They don't give hugs. They don't seem to, whatever it is. And my mom's side, she'd be like, "Ah, they're lazy. That side lazy. Your white side lazy. They don't do any." It's like
Yeah.
just a lack of understanding. Or my mom would be like, "You're going to be a doctor or an engineer," and my dad's like, "You can be anything you want. You can, go be an artist," right? My mom's like, "An artist? What do you mean?" I mean,
Yeah.
it's the
Yeah, no,
cultural differences.
there's the cultural differences. There's perception issues. When you look at, people have such a strict idea about what freedom means, and they don't actually think about what does the word mean. Never mind that the Freedom House, says that 70% of democracies around the world lack basic freedoms.
Yeah.
Never mind the Freedom Index from the Cato Institute, which is, they made a 100-page report, and it's not a pro-China report. They dedicate 3 pages to bashing China. They put Hong Kong as the 3rd freest place on earth by measurable freedoms in terms of incarceration rates, healthcare, all of this stuff.
Wow.
And that was the thing that I found the most ridiculous, was when you saw these U.S. senators coming over to Hong Kong to say, "We're going to help bring you freedom." The U.S. is ranked number 17 on that list.
Right. Hong Kong's like, "No, we're going to help you have some freedom. Like, let us take over your government for a minute."
And I think to start to try to begin exploring this idea of freedom and why even some African nations would rather take China's route. I'm gonna plug somebody named Dambisa Moyo here. She did a TED talk on, is the Chinese system the best system for developing African nations?
Mm-hmm.
And she really nails it in terms of prioritizing economic freedoms and other kinds of freedoms over political freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of how the political system works here, it is there are feedback systems in place, and it is way more accountable than people think. It's changed immensely from the time I arrived in 2008 to now. In 2008, you'd have government officials who were really, a little bit full of themselves. They knew that they were in charge. And one of the biggest efforts of this government so far has been to crack down on corruption. And when you deal with people here now, it is completely different. When my friends go back to their hometowns, you get the sense that they're there to serve you. They're nice to you. They're friendly to you. Even the first year I opened my bar, during the first couple of years, during Chinese New Year periods of times, you would have officials coming around, inspectors for different departments, and they're looking for handouts. They're looking for little red envelopes to not find any issues with your mm-hmm. places. That doesn't happen anymore. I mean, I'm sure corruption still happens in some places, but it's like night and day. Yeah. And I just feel like the progress that I've seen, the fact that there's an ability for the government to listen to us, showing how they stepped up to the plate for us also when they noticed the issue of foreigners being discriminated against or being treated suspiciously during this period of time. I never experienced any sort of a campaign like that in North America after 9/11, where there was such an effort to post things all over the place saying, "Guys, you shouldn't be doing this." So in terms of my version of how I see freedom, I feel more free here than I would in a lot of other places.
Really interesting. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing, what it was like during the lockdown there. It doesn't sound actually what you went through in your area much different than what I'm experiencing here in Los Angeles as far as what we can and cannot do, except we, of course, don't have the big, locking down of the whole building if somebody's suspected of it, because they're not testing. They're not testing. So those of us that think, well, maybe I have it, they're not testing us, and they're certainly not quarantining the building. They're certainly not, getting us the food delivery. And we're, there's all kinds of issues as far as coordination and collaboration. And, we have like a lot of problems, but, we're still getting through it.
Yeah, we'll figure this out. And like I said, hopefully we learn something from it and have systems in place that fill these little gaps that we're noticing now.
Yeah, and to the credit to the West is we haven't gone through this ever. China has. Asia went through SARS, and Africa dealing with Ebola. So I'm sure they've got more measures in place even there. But the West really hasn't gone through this that much. I mean, I can't think of another time. I mean, of course, we had the 1918 flu pandemic, but other than that, that was so long ago.
Yeah, the interesting question for me would be is if because with H1N1 coming from North America, if
Yeah.
that had happened in China, would they have reacted the same? Like, would they have classified the severity as the same? So when we say that we haven't experienced this in the
Mhm.
West, maybe because of that, people will say we just never actually did anything about it in the
Yeah,
West. We
you're
just
right. It's true because H1N1, that was when Obama was president, and it was 2008, 2009. We had just experienced a horrible economic crash. He didn't call it a state of a national emergency on it, and put in some extra um, help, I think, for hospitals and medical workers. But other than that, I don't think anybody really, it wasn't a big thing. It wasn't. So another thing that's very different is social media. We didn't really
mm,
have as many people on social media as we do right
right.
now. We also have right now, because of Donald Trump here in America, a much more heightened awareness to politics of,
Yeah.
more people are aware of what's going on. And so right now we were just primed for panic. Whereas in 2008, 2009, you're right. I mean, H1N1 came roaring back, and that was the 1918 flu pandemic. I mean, people were saying, they're saying this, oh, this is going to be it. This is going to be like the Spanish flu. And it was like, no, actually, we already had that come back, guys. You just
Yeah.
didn't really hear about it so much. And that
Right.
killed a
Right.
lot of people. I mean, they think that killed maybe 100 to 500,000 people around the world.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. The numbers, the estimates are pretty high. It's still going
Yeah,
around.
much
And
higher. Yeah,
yeah,
than what.
and so to what you said, maybe that's despite all the best efforts, maybe that's what's going to have to happen with this. Also, it will slowly kind of make its way around. But I mean, we'll have to,
Yeah, now
you know,
H1N1 is what? That's influenza type A, I think.
yeah, yeah,
So it's,
exactly.
they just call it type A now. They don't want to freak you out so much,
Yeah,
but,
it's not scary anymore. Yeah.
right, to not tell you, oh, by the way, you got the Spanish flu. Don't worry. All right, Daniel. Well,
Definitely,
thank you so much for joining me here on the
my
show.
pleasure.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
Daniel
thanks.
Dumbrill, you can check out his YouTube channel. I do have the links down below. The link to the interview with the doctor who was really, truly on the front lines. We talk about hearing stories from doctors on the front lines. This doctor was in Wuhan, in the front lines, at one of the temporary hospitals, I believe, that they just
That's
erected
right.
out of nowhere. And
Mhm.
that is an excellent interview to watch. And you can get to Daniel's channel through that link. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much.